Good morning and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Lifelong Learning Committee of Perth and Kinross Council, 20th of January 2021. I'd like to welcome everyone to the meeting and those watching online. Can I remind members and officers to mute their microphones throughout the meeting unless they're speaking, and advise that today's meeting will be streamed live and also recorded to be available to view on YouTube via the Council's website following the meeting. I'd like to welcome Councillors Liz Barrett and Councillor Ian Massey to this, their first meeting of Lifelong Learning as new councillors. Can I ask Linda Brown to please take a roll call of those attending today's meeting and to advise us of any apologies?
Sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. Good morning, everyone. When I call out your name, can you please indicate if you're present? Councillor Baird.
Present.
Councillor Liz Barrett.
Present.
We have apologies from Mr. Jack Bell, convener. Mr. Andy Charlton. I'll come back, maybe. Councillor John Duff.
Present.
Mr. Adrian Ferguson.
Present.
Councillor Angus Forbes.
Present.
Mrs. Pat Giles. Mr. Martin Gowrie. Mrs. Audrey Macaulay.
Good morning.
Sorry, was that Mrs. Audrey Macaulay?
Yes, present.
Thank you. Mr. Dean McBride. Councillor Xander McDade.
Present.
Miss Theresa Moran. Councillor Beth Pover.
We have an
Present. Sorry, I couldn't unmute there.
Councillor Callum Purvis.
Present.
Councillor John Ribbick.
Present.
Councillor Crawford Reid.
Present.
Councillor Fiona Sarwar.
Present.
Councillor Caroline Shires. We know she's present.
Present.
Councillor Lewis Simpson.
Present.
Miss Carolyn Weston.
Present.
Can I just go back and we'll double check again? Is Mr. Andy Charlton here today? Nope. Mrs. Pat Giles.
Sorry, Linda. Did you call Councillor Ian Massey?
Oh, I beg your pardon. No, Councillor Ian Massey. I'm so sorry. I forgot.
Present.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Councillor Massey. I haven't updated my list. Can I just check Mrs. Pat Giles? Nope. And Mr. Martin Gowrie. And Mr. Dean McBride. No, well, I've called these out twice now, convener, so I take it that they're unable to attend today.
That's fine, Linda. Thank you very much. And councillors, before we conduct the meeting of the agenda today, it befalls to us to mark the sad passing of our colleague, Councillor Henry Anderson. It was a great shock to all of us to hear that Henry passed away on the 27th of December as a result of COVID-19. There have been many lovely things said about Henry over the past few weeks, and I just wanted us to take time to reflect on the contribution Henry made to this committee and our efforts to deliver the very best lives possible for children and young people across Perth and Kinross. Henry was elected in 2012, and I think it's fair to say he threw himself into his role as a councillor with gusto. As a member of this committee, he would always have lots to say about the different papers we consider, and most especially if there was something in relation to the children and young people of Almond and Erne. It was in the behind-the-scenes work of this committee that Henry made a hugely important contribution. I, like many of you, sat on numerous and sometimes lengthy head teacher appointment panels with Henry, including one Friday that I recall where he and I were in interviews in one of those Puller House meeting rooms with no windows all day long. Henry and I participated in one panel in the morning and another in the afternoon, And Henry's good humour over our lunch break certainly helped the day pass. I remember it well. We chatted about music, the Bridge of Earn Institute, his family, the North Coast 500 that we both shared a love of, and probably more than a bit of politics too. That was very much the chat that you got with Henry. The placing request committees and attendance subs were also well supported by Henry, and committee services tell me he would often step in at short notice and was always keen to ensure that that side of the business ran smoothly, recognising the important role this made in children's lives. Henry would have an interesting observation or a practical suggestion to make in these meetings, and always conducted himself with empathy, good humour and patience, something I know that committee services greatly appreciated. I hope that in due course we'll have an opportunity to remember Henry together in an appropriate way. But for the moment, I would like to extend condolences on behalf of all of us on the Lifelong Learning Committee and the officers who we work alongside to all Henry's loved ones. Henry was a loving husband, a proud father and a very proud grandfather, and he will be missed by so many. I'd like to invite Councillor Rebick and any other councillors who'd like to say a few words, and then we'll have a minute's silence. Thank you.
Thank you, convener. Thanks for those kind words as well. Henry was a gentleman, and I think that should be the starting point of any discussion about Henry Anderson. We often speak about the 3 R's in education, or at least those of us that are a wee bit older do, which of course is reading, writing and arithmetic. And as I speak further about Henry's many qualities, I would like to do so with your indulgence in the context of the 3 H's for Henry. H for helpful, most importantly. It was no coincidence that back in 2017, after the last local elections, that Henry was put in charge of room, well, not in charge of room 411, but put in room 411 with the 5 newbies, which is Councillors Donaldson, Pover, Salwar, Waters and myself. Experienced colleagues understood that he was the most knowledgeable and crucially most patient of our group, and was therefore best placed to answer the barrage of queries that were likely to come his way and did come his way. Who do I speak to about this? Does this sound okay? Does Councillor Gray really manage to walk up 4 flights of stairs without getting knackered? And many more such similar questions of a varied and magnitude. So there was no coincidence that Henry was put in the room to look after us. And so it turned out. You could ask Henry anything, and if he didn't know, which he usually did, he would go out of his way to find out for you. Nothing was ever too much trouble, and he engaged with your problems enthusiastically without making you feel like he was only doing it because he felt he had to. And it's also no coincidence that he was put in this committee to help with the 4 newbies here. 3 of us from room 411, along with Councillor McEwen. I know I speak here today on behalf of them all, along with Councillor Massey, but particularly Fiona and Beth, who have shared both a room and this committee with Henry. And I know our lives as new councillors have been made much easier by his presence in both. H is also for humility. For all Henry's great help, it was a measure of the man that he was entirely comfortable asking everybody else for help as well. And that was an endearing quality that he had. It's an endearing quality for anyone to have. He was also able to disagree with you and engage in robust debate with you without ever making you feel annoyed or upset, mainly because he was able to respect your opinion, even when he disagreed with it. Last but not least, H is for humour, and Henry had that in abundance, as you've already touched upon, Councillor Shires. Even when you were hearing stories for the 2nd and 3rd time, which you frequently did, he told them with such fun and enthusiasm that you didn't ever get bored with them. His sense of humour was never more apparent than at MLC. He often told officers that he wasn't available between 12 and 1:30 on a Monday because he had MLC, and we all made it sound very important. But for the uninitiated, it stands for Monday Lunch Club, and he was great company at whatever venue it was convened in. So in summary, Henry was a gentleman. He will be clearly missed by many in his constituency, and obviously most acutely by his family, of course. But he'll be missed on this committee, and he'll be deeply and sorely missed in room 411, which will never be the same without him. Thank you, convener.
Thank you, Councillor Rebick. Any other elected members who'd like to make any comments? I think Councillor McDade, you did.
Yes, thank you, convener. it was shocking news when we heard about Councillor Anderson over the festive period, and our condolences do go out to his family. I recall a lot of work with Henry over the past 3.5 years. He was very welcoming to me when I joined the council in 2017, and one of the things that really struck me about Henry was his strong sense of fair play. And I recall back in 2018 rather, he offered to let me substitute for him on the Lifelong Learning Committee after I'd unceremoniously been removed, and allowed me to move amendments against rural school closures, which I was passionate about, but also he was very passionate about. And I can recall his contributions at all of the different rural school debates we've had over the past several years, of which he was a really strong proponent. I think also he really never had an issue asking the questions that perhaps the rest of us were holding back from asking. He would ask those questions and have absolutely no issue probing officers around things that perhaps others were just a bit too shy to ask. So I think we will miss that on this committee. I know I will miss it on this committee, but he also really showed that you can bring a real sense of respect and a sense of humour to these proceedings, and that it is not all about being serious all the time. There is aspects that can bring us together, and I think Henry embodied a lot of that. And I certainly will miss him a lot, both on this committee and in the council. And I do think that we are worse without him, sadly. But I know we all feel the same.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. Councillor Purvis, followed by Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Convener. And I think that the three previous speakers have summed up our thoughts on Henry pretty well. Just a few of my additional thoughts. We have lots of different roles as councillors, whether it's sitting on committees or indeed doing the work in our own wards. And I think it was clear, as has already been said, that Henry was extremely dedicated to his ward of Armagh and in particular to Bridgeavern. And I think the fact that we saw with the planning committee even only just about a month ago now, that he still made the effort to come along to that when he was clearly already unwell, to sit on an application for his own ward, which I think says an awful lot about him and about his dedication to his constituents, which we all try to strive for. But I think that was a very strong example of that. I too enjoyed sitting on many committees with him, including the LRB, as well as some of the panels that Caroline the convener has alluded to during her contribution, and he always was very strong in his contributions and made a good effort to participate fully in those discussions. I think also the references to humour are something that I would recognise very much as well. Even if you'd had a committee or a full council meeting where you had strongly disagreed with what he had been saying in the chamber, which did happen on more than one occasion, we could have a good laugh about it in the councillors' lounge afterwards, or indeed in the corridor as well. I had a lot of debates with him about politics. I think that it's fair to say that I didn't manage to convince him of the benefits of the union, and he was very strong in his views on that. But we could always have such debates with a laugh and with good humour, which I think is always very, very important in politics. So I'd just like to add my condolences to his family and friends, and indeed to his colleagues across the council, both councillors and staff. He will be very, very sadly missed.
Thank you, Councillor Purvis. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Convener. If I may just add that the death of our friend Henry Anderson leaves a big space in this council which will be impossible to fill. As we've said, Henry was the most congenial of colleagues, especially in the councillors' lounge and over lunches, which when Henry was there tended to be longer than other lunches, with wide-ranging discussions. And I particularly remember discussing his his new hobby, which was to tootle around the countryside on his electric bike. So Henry Ira RIP, we all miss him.
Very well put, Councillor Simpson. Councillor Baird.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think for me as a ward councillor colleague with him, it was a tremendous shock to me. In fact, on the Monday night before he died, I had an email conversation with him while he was lying in ICU. And his last words to me, "I don't know where January will take me," which I thought was quite poignant, because at that moment I really did not know how ill he was. And as Councillor Purver said, for him to attend development management on the 15th of December and to see a bin application approved, and the month before that Oudenarde finally gets some building done, I think that's two things that Henry has really banged on about for quite some time. So I will miss him, because we had politics were totally apart, but by Jove, we got on really well as colleagues. Great respect for each other. Thank you.
That's a nice way to finish our thoughts about Henry. Can I now invite the committee to observe a minute's silence in remembrance of Councillor Anderson? Thank you. Thank you all so much for that. I think that was a fitting, opportunity for us to just remember Henry. And like I said, I hope we'll have a proper opportunity to remember him and indeed Councillor Band in due course. Okay, so deep breaths all round, and that takes us on to getting back into the meeting. Councillor Simpson, I note from the chat, sorry it was a bit slow coming up on my screen. Hopefully that's not going to be another of the gremlins that we've had in the past here. That you had a question on the lay members of the committee.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed, convener, if I may. I've been on this committee for a long time off and on, and I'm acutely aware of the key role played by lay members. And I'm disappointed to see today that quite a number of them are not with us. And I just wanted an assurance that we have given them every assistance with the palaver they may encounter in joining virtual meetings, and that we have afforded them every opportunity to take advantage of our IT expertise within the council to make sure that they're not here because they couldn't join, they're not here for other reasons. I just wanted that assurance, because I think we do need their input, and it's important that they take part in these proceedings where possible.
I believe that is the case, Councillor Simpson, and indeed I was speaking to one of the lay members yesterday who was explaining the problems that she was having accessing the meetings, but I'll ask officers if we can make contact with them all post this meeting just to confirm if there's anything that we can do to help smooth access into the meetings. Thank you for that. I was wondering myself actually, so that's helpful. Moving on to the agenda, the next we have is declarations of interest. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest in respect of business on the agenda? And if there are, can you put a DI in the chat box? I'm not seeing any. which takes us on to the minutes of previous meetings. Can we agree the minute of the Lifelong Learning Committee of the 4th of November 2020?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. And can we note the minutes of the meeting of the Joint Negotiating Committee of the 22nd of September 2020?
Agreed.
Noted.
Agreed. And can we also note the minute of the meeting of the children and of the Perth and Kinross Children, Young People and Families Partnership of the 18th of September 2020?
Noted.
Thank you. And that takes us on to item 5, which is COVID-19 restrictions update on impact on education and children's services. I'm going to invite the Executive Director, Sheena Devlin, to give a verbal update, and there's various officers that Sheena will introduce as she goes along. It would be helpful if we could agree just to keep the questions to the end, just so that the officers can flow through, because some of your questions might be answered as they go along, and I'll look in the chat. There's a comment here from Andy Charlton saying he's here, but he's unable to unmute. That's a common problem. We all have Andy on this. If you've got comments you want to make, Andy, if you put them in the chat box and we'll pick them up from there, that would be helpful. So I'll hand over to Sheena.
Good morning and thank you very much, Convener. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well. I just want to start off by providing an overview of some information in relation to the delivery of the essential service that is Education and Children's Services, and I will be joined in doing this by various colleagues from the senior management team who will contribute to this as well. Our people have delivered essential services of education, social care and a range of other supports for children, young people and their families throughout the period of this pandemic. Guidance was issued on 21st of December in response to the First Minister's announcement made on the 19th of December 2020, which was intended to support a phased start to the spring term in 2021. That phased start included providing critical childcare for the children of key workers and for those children who were identified as being vulnerable in some way over the period of the 7th and 8th of January. It included providing learning provision starting week beginning the 11th of January for everybody, and with the intention of a full return to school buildings and face-to-face learning and teaching for all children from the 18th of January. In the advice of the 31st of December, a subgroup on education and children's issues recommended that remote learning should continue beyond the 18th of January due to the fact that prevalence levels meant that there was very little headroom to allow schools to open and contain the R number at or below 1. In her statement to Parliament on the 4th of January, the First Minister then confirmed that this would apply to all pupils except those identified as vulnerable and the children of key workers, and would also include regulated daycare of children's services, which is effectively nurseries, playgroups and after-school clubs, as well as primary and secondary schools. The First Minister in Parliament yesterday, following the fortnightly review of the national lockdown, announced that the current restrictions would continue until the middle of February. That all children and young people would not return to in-school learning from the 1st of February, and as such the period of remote learning would continue. The First Minister did say that she hoped that schools will at least be able to begin a phased return in the middle of next month. In December, our planning for the start of the new term was undertaken swiftly in partnership with our school staff, a range of council officers and with our trade union colleagues. This work continued over the course of the Christmas break, and a number of people were also working in our out of hours and duty teams over that time, and we had a core number of staff who were also involved in supporting contact tracing during the festive period. The plans that were made and put in place prior to the Christmas break and during that time all required to be changed and adapted further following the announcement on the 4th of January. And I would like to offer once again my sincere thanks to everyone who was involved in this work, undertaken as ever with professionalism, with compassion and with determination. We all know and feel how challenging it is to be living, working and learning and caring for others in our current restricted circumstances. We appreciate the logistical and emotional challenges faced by many families who are juggling with work, childcare, supporting learning at home. We understand how difficult it can be for children and young people not to be with their friends or see those adults out with their families who provide care and support in many different ways. Our in-school provision for learning is available to the children of all essential workers and those considered to be vulnerable. Rather than operate from specific schools as we did previously, this is available across all schools, making access and travel easier for many and ensuring children and young people who are eligible are able to be in a familiar environment. Remote learning is available to all children and young people. Some will undertake this at home, and for some this will be undertaken whilst at school. Remote learning is a range of different approaches, activities, and involves different types of resources, and sometimes none. A component of remote learning will be online, and one component of online will be live interactions and live teaching. At this point, convener, I'm going to pass over to Sharon Johnson and then Greg Boland, who are going to take you through some of aspects that I have mentioned thus far in a bit more detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director, and good morning, everyone. I'd just like to give a brief overview of the plans that we put in place following the First Minister's announcement on the 4th of January that there would be further restrictions on the opening of schools. So prior to the schools opening on the 7th of January, the central team updated the guidance required that we had put in place in December, required for ELC settings in schools to process childcare and in-school learning applications. We provided support for updated risk assessments for schools and ELC settings to open, including those for individual members of staff or pupils with underlying health conditions for whom the rules had changed. 2 meetings were offered and taken up with trade union representatives on the 5th and 6th of January, and we were very grateful for their attendance at those, as many of those members were actually on holiday at the time. Offers were made also to head teachers who wished to attend meetings on the 6th of January with quality improvement officers and service managers to update them on the guidance and the new arrangements for a return the following day, and many head teachers took up that offer. The IT team worked extremely hard to make sure that all of the digital devices that we were requiring to have in place for families were given in good time. An ELC bulletin provided information for all early years settings, including updated guidance, support for wellbeing, and an area for sharing good practice for remote learning. And that means that all of our partner providers, bar 2, have remained open during this time. The early years team also met with the funded provider focus group to share updates and support settings and to look into the issues that are met by partner providers in remaining open and supporting our children. So childcare was put in place in ELC settings in schools for those who were eligible for the 7th and the 8th of January. Over 800 children and young people attended on those days, just half of those who were registered for places. All staff returned to work on the 7th of January, either in school to support childcare or from home to prepare for remote learning, which commenced for all pupils on Monday the 11th of January. The Scottish Government is clear that we must keep places in schools and ELC to a minimum. And so the list of key workers that we had in place during the previous lockdown has, however, expanded to include those staff supporting education, staff who are providing support for the vaccination programme and contact tracing. Further expansion of the PKC essential workers category now includes essential food retailers. In PKC, we also made the decision to open all of our specialist provisions to the most vulnerable pupils also, following a review of our previous experience of lockdown in March, to minimise the impact on children and young people with significant additional support needs. A subgroup of our education response group has now developed a process to support applications and also reviews and appeals for places which have been refused. All partner providers have been encouraged to remain open, and currently all but 2 are doing that. Childcare is also available, including childminders, out-of-school care provision and informal arrangements through friends or family. Our current data shows that we have approximately 1,800 children and young people registered in our local authority schools and nurseries for in-school learning, with an average attendance of approximately 1,200 pupils per day. This is made up of approximately 42% of the total attendance by vulnerable children and young people, and about 58% by children of essential workers. In terms of children and young people by sector, this is estimated to be about 10% of the overall role in ELC in primary, approximately 4% in secondary, and approximately 28% of our specialist provisions. And those numbers are changing as the week goes on. To date, around an additional 430 children are also attending our private nurseries. To support in-school learning, the minimum numbers of staff are requested to attend. Of the impact of a positive case of COVID in schools and nurseries at this time, and the implications on essential workers if their child is identified as a close contact and then requires to self-isolate. In order to minimise the impact of this on their ability to attend work in hospitals and care homes, we have advised that where staffing and space allows in schools, groups of children in one space should be kept as low as possible. So at present, the average daily attendance of staff, including teachers, support staff and administration staff, is approximately 1,000. Children and young people who attend schools are able to access the same learning as their classmates who are learning at home, whilst being supervised by teaching and support staff. This is important to ensure continuity of the curriculum for all children and young people, and allows classes to stay connected to their teachers and peers. The Executive Director has talked about remote learning, and the education team continue to update and develop our remote learning guidance as part of our contingency planning. The guidance that we put out to schools was intended to provide guidance to schools for remote learning up until the 18th of January. Clearly, that has now changed from the First Minister's announcement yesterday, and we will continue to update our remote learning guidance in relation to that. Following the announcement on the 1st of February, we did make additional amendments, and guidance was developed and included new links to national resources which have just become available. Information has been provided to support parents' understanding of the range of activities which make up learning at home and how they can access support if required. The Deputy First Minister announced a national review of local authority guidance on the 14th of January, and officers in Perth and Kinross met with HMI on Friday the 15th of January to discuss our guidance as part of that process. In addition, a number of schools were asked to discuss their implementation of this with HMI inspectors, and 4 schools in Perth and Kinross were asked to participate in this review. A report from HM inspectors on their review of local authority guidance will be published on the 22nd of January, and a further report on the implementation in schools on the 29th of January. We'll continue to develop our practice in remote learning based on feedback from parents and from any national review. In terms of digital access, digital devices had been supplied to families who needed them to support their learning at home, and all new requests from schools up to December were delivered in time for the commencement of remote learning on the 11th of January. To date, approximately 750 iPads, 200 laptops, 200 Chromebooks and over 130 hotspots have been distributed, with an additional 350 laptops, 250 iPads and 100 Chromebooks being ordered for distribution, and these will be available by the end of January. I just want to say a quick update around SQA, and given the disruption caused to the senior phase SQA programme, decisions have been made to move to an alternative assessment model, firstly for National 5 qualifications and later for higher and advanced higher. As most pupils are now not in school, additional adjustments will have to be made to accommodate this change. Advice from SQA to the local authorities and schools throughout January is to keep a focus on learning and teaching, and to ensure that teachers continue to make use of national resources and understanding standards. Further guidance on higher and advanced higher courses will be published. from the 18th to the 29th of January, and work will continue with the National Qualification Group to provide further information based on how the term proceeds. We are working through a range of scenarios with secondary head teachers to ensure that there is sufficient time and space in collegiate calendars to allow for rigorous moderation and quality assurance of the assessment process. Supporting wellbeing, as the Executive Director mentioned, is a key focus for us, and we are very conscious of the pressures that the current model of learning places on children, young people, their parents and carers, and indeed on our staff. We have increased the number of places in school for our most vulnerable families, but we've also ensured that a range of measures are in place to support our communities. The Parenting and Family Learning team continue to offer support either via phone or video call. Virtual groups will start at the end of January to include the parenting programmes such as infant massage, peak learning, incredible years and strengthening families. Individual coaching and support will continue with identified families who require that. There is currently a survey on social media to ask what topics family require support with, and that will include our improved offer as we move forward. The Educational Psychology Service have continued supporting schools and families and have reinstated a telephone advice line to offer support through direct access to an educational psychologist for staff, parents and for young people. The service has recently been supporting communities as part of critical incident response, and counselling in schools has continued virtually. And where circumstances require, providers have been able to provide face-to-face sessions with appropriate risk assessments. Head teacher bulletins have provided information for all staff to access a wide range of wellbeing resources, including those from corporate services and also from national resource, including such offers as Place to Think, which provides individual and group supports for staff to reflect and maintain their own resilience. All head teachers have been offered a range of support specifically for them, including access to bespoke group sessions. We continue to engage with head teachers on the leadership development opportunities normally available to them and how they can be adapted to suit their context. Active Schools continue to provide support to schools in school learning and also recording activity sessions which all schools can access. Support staff who are on rotas to support in-school learning have also been offered professional learning opportunities with a focus on the Circle programme, which is rolled out to all schools to support inclusive practice. We are mindful of the many changes which our staff are responding to, and a key focus for ELC and school leaders is their ability to support their staff teams, their pupils and their parents while providing a high quality learning offer. Given the most recent announcement by the First Minister that remote learning will continue until at least the February half term, we are now considering reviewing our approach to pupils accessing our specialist provisions to ensure that all children who can attend are provided with that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, and good morning, committee. Our Business and Resources team and the Research Information Improvement teams have generally been working since lockdown 7 days a week, which obviously included the Christmas break, responding to the pandemic that we face, and also ensuring that we support our colleagues in education services, which obviously includes schools, and also for the services for young people and families. Our statutory functions have all continued to be required to be delivered throughout the pandemic. Functions such as school placement requests, statutory appeals, free school meals, school clothing grants and school transport applications have all been approved and taken forward. We have been developing, adapting and managing data and information requirements and rising from the current arrangements, including essential worker and vulnerable children and young people, staff and pupil attendance, engagement and SQA predictions. We have continued ongoing performance, risk, change management activities to support the service development irrespective of the pandemic conditions. We have been supporting greater online access to services both externally and internally, which has been accelerated to a degree assisted by the current imperative. Support for our children, young people and families requires our staff to be on rotas to ensure social work establishment establishments remain operational. PPE for staff is managed and support for statutory functions such as case conferences and review meetings continue to be delivered. Freedom of information, complaints, subject access requests and increased communications have all continued to be delivered. A significant amount of the work of the teams has been undertaken to support education recovery groups, delivering PPE, IT equipment and processing the data for significant amounts of additional direct payments to families. Free school meals is normally an annual process, but during the pandemic it's been necessary to run fortnightly payments to around 2,200 payments each run, also including holiday payments, winter payments and also isolation payments for free school meal pupils. We've been working with our Tayside colleagues in Dundee Angus and Tayside contracts to review cleaning and catering operations in the COVID environment, meeting fortnightly to discuss and agree changes in light of the current guidance and application in the current environment. We have put new cleaning regimes in place to meet the COVID requirements, including the introduction of daytime cleaning across the full estate. Catering is in place with bagged menus to ensure that we are supporting social distancing and social bubbles. Every establishment has risk assessments to cover staff, pupils, overall school provision and also individual assessments for staff and pupils. We continue to work on school environments including space planning, physical distancing, provision of signage and guidance for schools relating to these areas. We obviously work very closely with our colleagues in property services and head teachers on heating and ventilation and also green, safe and managed access to schools for essential works. We have continued to carry on our user reference groups, design team meetings and attended parent council meetings as required. On the school estate transformational review, it's unlikely that the drop-in sessions will be possible any time in the near future, so we're planning to do web-based, telephone-based consultations with our communities. Construction obviously stopped for 4 months during us trying to roll out our 1140 hours across the estate, but I'm pleased to confirm that most of our projects have now been completed and also can confirm now that the nurseries at Oakbank and Instewr are now available, and also the major project at Lawnforgan will allow the pupils to return when that obviously is feasible. Like everyone, the Business and Resource Services team and the Research Information Improvement teams have faced several challenges, trying to deliver critical services under the COVID-19 restrictions, adapting constantly to the changing environment and guidance, managing the expectations of others not involved in the delivery of the operations, pressure from inquiries in relation to complaints, freedom of information requests, Scottish Government grant returns, providing information to the Scottish Government and COSLA on COVID-19 expenditure and loss of income. We're also ensuring that all payments are made for education maintenance allowance, foster care payments, kinship care payments, direct payments to ensure our young people receive all the money they require in the current situation, and also ensuring all our suppliers and private nurseries receive payments on time. We also had to refund numbers of school trips, music instruction and school-lets for parents and carers. At the same time, we're obviously having to train new staff on new processes and obviously adapt to that virtually. And last but not least, we obviously need to manage the ECS revenue budget of £204 million and obviously trying to accommodate expenditure from the COVID-19 pandemic and also planning for the new budget for 21-22. As with other teams and staff, it's been a challenging to work at home, especially during periods of lockdown, train new staff and also allowing for caring responsibilities. But I'd just like to say a personal thank you to all my colleagues within Education Children's Services and across the council, but personally say a very big thank you to my own team, the Business and Resources team, and also the Research Information Improvement teams for their amazing contribution and continued support to ensure that Perth and Ross is in the best place in response to the COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg and Sharon, and you will have heard the sheer scale, the breadth, the depth and therefore the complexity of just some of the challenges that we are facing as we all operate in these very different times. Our people in services for children, young people and families have once again also responded swiftly and with creativity to ensure that they continue to provide care and support to those children, young people and families who may need it. Contact, for example, is still being provided, but in different ways. Support for foster carers and those they care for is still available. It's the how of all of that has changed. And I'm going to pass over now to Hazel Robertson, Head of Service for Children, Young People and Families, who's going to talk you through some of those changes and adaptations. And then Jackie Pepper is going to give an overview from both her role as Deputy Director in Education and Children's Services, but also being Chief Social Work Officer and what that has meant in the context of ACS as well. Thank you very much. Over to you, Hazel.
Thanks very much, Executive Director, and good morning to the committee. In providing an update on services for children and young people, I will try and keep this brief. I appreciate it's difficult to absorb all of the information when there's not paper to refer to, but I can confirm that certainly since the pandemic began, and certainly in recent weeks and months, we've been working in accordance with Scottish Government guidance, and the most recent update of that, which was the 15th of January this year, which related to children's services. The Coronavirus Scotland Act has allowed the extension of regulations approved by Parliament to the 31st of March and potentially to the 30th of September, as you'll know, and that's given flexibility to the children's hearing system. So there is no need for children to appear in person at present. There is no secondary hearing, which is a requirement for child protection orders, and there's been relaxed timescales for reviews of compulsory supervision orders where we've had particular concerns about children. So that has altered some of the way we work. The Coronavirus Act has also removed some of the limits on the maximum limit for our foster carers, which has alleviated some of the pressures that workers and children are facing. But within services for children, young people and families, we've prioritised, as you would expect, our child protection responses and crisis intervention. And despite having reduced the availability of individuals within office spaces, we have had to have access to all of our office spaces to provide a very limited team and professional bubble to reduce infection risk, but to provide that in-person support where that's required. Certainly over Christmas and New Year, cover was provided 24 hours a day within our out of hours service, and also from Reach, who were available to families wherever and whenever they were required. That was supplemented by a skeleton staff that were operational on the daytime between Christmas and New Year for critical home visits and for the visits to children on the Child Protection Register. Overall, the service is also providing continued support for those in Wellbank, our supported accommodation for young people. We continue to provide respite to children with additional support needs and at Woodley, and our fieldwork services have continued to operate in a more limited scale. We're constantly reviewing need and reprioritising services as required. All risk assessments have been revised in accordance with the most recent guidance on the new variant of COVID-19, and our hygiene precautions have been reinforced with the availability of PPE, awareness of ventilation, etc. The service overall has continued to provide in-person contact with families where that's been required, but we have been promoting the use of digital platforms where that's possible. So, for example, all of our interagency referral discussions where there's been a particular concern raised about a child or a family, and all our child protection case conferences are taking place virtually. That's really been unimpeded by COVID, and that has continued. It's been different, and we've had to make adjustments, but that has been possible to continue. It's probably worth committee noting that some of the children that we have the most or the highest levels of concerns for and are on our child protection register will remain on the child protection register for longer, because there is an absence of community-based supports where we could ensure that support is ongoing for those families. And maybe to also assure you that all children have been physically seen at a minimum of a period of 14 days, so that we know these children are safe and well. The recent guidance has confirmed that contact arrangements where children are living apart from their birth families must be respected where that's possible to do so and safe. So all contact is being risk assessed, and where that can be virtual or by telephone, that's being promoted. However, it will continue, for example, babies who it is really vital that they have a physical connection with their parent, and also where we are supporting rehabilitation home for children, because we really don't want to delay that if we can avoid it. The transporting of children is only taking place in exceptional circumstances. So, for example, to transport children to foster care or from foster care, that will continue to take place, but otherwise that's being avoided. And clearly the pandemic has accentuated risk for women and children. We know this, particularly for those experiencing domestic abuse and coercive control. But we are continuing to work very closely with partners in the police and Perthshire Women's Aid and RASAC to ensure that appropriate support is available for these women and children where that's required, and our housing colleagues in the council have been particularly supportive in that respect. Just to mention children's hearings, they are continuing to take place virtually, but it's only the critical hearings. So reviews have been delayed, and that is a national position. Many panel members are also shielding, and access to IT has exacerbated some issues around availability, but that is being addressed on a case-by-case basis, and the Children's Hearing Recovery Plan aims to shrink the overall hearing system in the longer term and promote much earlier effective intervention. But there is a campaign currently underway to recruit nationally 700 panel members. So I mean, I think that's an indication of just how many more people are required at the moment. I think probably just finally just to say that children who are not on the Child Protection Register but for whom we have multi-agency plans are being contacted, and those who are not in school, because we've certainly identified a number of vulnerable children who would be in school and be seen, but those who are not attending school are being contacted on a weekly basis. All staff are being advised to work from home where possible, but as I've mentioned earlier, core services are required and we need to have access to office space to do that. Our staff have been amazingly resilient. There are no major staffing issues at present, but we have been considering contingencies in case this is required as we move forward into the future. And probably that's all I need to say at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hazel. Members of committee, I realise that this is a lot of information that you're getting today. I think what it does demonstrate, however, is, as I said earlier, just the scale, the complexity and the depth of the work that is undertaken across all parts of education and children's services as we continue to provide the essential services of education and care for our children and young people. So I'm going to ask Jackie now if she can conclude our updates for you, and then we'll be happy to take any questions, recognising of course that if there's any concerns or any issues that any of you have about any of this and you want to ask us questions at any time, then we do have our generic contact email addresses where we will respond to all queries, but we'd be very happy to take questions today. So Jackie, thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to say a few words about the role of Chief Social Work Officer during the pandemic. And as Chief Social Work Officer, I've maintained a council-wide role ensuring professional oversight of social work and social care services throughout the pandemic, monitoring our fulfilment of statutory social work functions, highlighting demand pressures and ensuring that these are managed and resourced. The Chief Social Work Officer has had an enhanced role from May 2020, along with the Directors of Public Health, Directors of Nursing and the Chief Officer for the Health and Social Care Partnership, as directed by the Cabinet Secretary in relation to care services for vulnerable adults. More recently, on behalf of the Chief Officers Group for Public Protection, and as Chief Social Work Officer with a key role in public protection, I've established a new multi-agency Protecting People Coordinating Group, which met for the first time on the 11th of January 21. This group builds on the strengthened public protection arrangements that were put into place during COVID, and it aims to enhance networking, coordination and collaboration on a wide range of protecting people and public protection matters. It will have responsibility for the monitoring and management of a multi-agency public protection risk register on behalf of the Chief Officers Group, and provide members with peer support, opportunity to share and exchange learning, promote good practice and develop a shared agenda across the partnerships which are involved in protecting people. I would also like to provide a short update in relation to criminal justice social work, which, as you know, is managed within Education and Children's Services. Members of Lifelong Learning Committee should be aware that, in line with the Council's scheme of administration, a report will be considered by the Housing and Communities Committee on the 3rd of February, which provides an annual report of the work of the Perth and Kinross Community Justice Partnership for the year 2019 to 2020. This report includes within it a detailed account of our criminal justice social work services over that year. It will also cover the work of the Tayside Strategic Oversight Group for Multi-Agency Public Protection Arrangements, commonly known as MAPA, for the same period. You will know that Perth Sheriff Court was initially closed in April 2020 and court business was diverted to Dundee Sheriff Court. And from a criminal justice social work perspective, these arrangements worked well due to good liaison and partnership working, and our social work services continued to provide and supply reports to the court as requested. Perth Sheriff Court opened in the autumn in a more limited capacity for routine business, and with the introduction of enhanced restrictions under Tier 4 earlier this month, the court is now prioritising more serious cases and reducing its business. So as the courts have resumed their activity following the first lockdown, there have been increases in the number of cases that are required to be managed by criminal justice social work. And in spite of the introduction of further restrictions at the start of 2021, we anticipate that these numbers will continue to increase up until the end of March. Continued restrictions will necessitate continual review and adaptation of our working practices across the justice sector. Social workers and criminal justice assistants have continued to have contact with service users via telephone and IT wherever this is possible, and they've continued to undertake face-to-face contact using appropriate PPE and protection, giving priority to domestic violence perpetrators, people at high risk of harm and reoffending, people being released from prison, MAPA clients in the community, and those who are vulnerable. In April, the Cabinet Secretary for Justice announced the short-term prisoners would be nearing the end of their sentence would be released early, and this was designed to help tackle the COVID outbreak and the pressures on the Scottish Prison Service. This took place between May and July, and in Perth and Kinross, a total of 13 people were released early. A multi-agency process to manage these individuals was established in Perth and Kinross, and that included the Scottish Prison Service, Police Scotland, the Safer Communities team, our housing colleagues and health colleagues, as well as criminal justice social work services. Unpaid work was suspended in line with national policy in April 2020. Initially, project supervisors were placed on the redeployment list and assisted with emergency painting and repair work for vulnerable people across our communities. However, development work continued, and the unpaid work team procured a telehandler to help with their forklift training capability and the West Bank site is now an authorised provider of training for the Department of Work and Pensions and has attracted a training budget through the European Social Fund. Unpaid work staff returned to the site at the end of June 2020 and operations commenced in early July, which was incremental in accordance with Scottish Government guidelines. However, due to restrictions such as social distancing, it was not possible to return to the pre-COVID service delivery. Furthermore, in December 2020, the Scottish Government announced the provision of funding to assist local authorities to address the backlog of unpaid work hours, which was to be administered via the third sector. And this additional funding will support work with the St Johnstone Community Trust, Saints in the Community, and support a community project providing outdoor furniture for schools, community centres and care homes, etc. In response to a letter by the Chief Medical Officer received on Monday of this week, that's the 18th of January, this letter advocated consistency across Scotland and emphasised the need to restrict movement and contact for non-essential purposes. So our unpaid work services have ceased once again. I'd also like to pay thanks and appreciation to all staff who've responded with skill and a huge commitment to the very many changes that have had to be made to practice and to achieving that at great pace. In terms of criminal justice performance during the COVID period, we will see considerable differences, and elected members will see that demonstrated in our performance in reporting in due course. And the most significant change will be the drop in community payback orders, which have reduced significantly. Similarly, the number of court reports that have been submitted to report have gone down as well. So we'll see that in due course. So thank you very much for the ability to give this update this morning. Thank you very much.
Convener, thank you very much on behalf of all the officers in ECS for allowing us the opportunity to share the vast amounts of work that have been going on, some seen and a lot unseen, I think committee would agree, and yet without that unseen behind the scenes work that keeps the wheels moving, we wouldn't be able to deliver the services that we've done. I do appreciate, as I said, that there was a lot of information there, and as I say, we're happy to answer any questions today or if more appropriate another time, but we do thank you very much for that opportunity.
Thank you very much to everybody for their contributions there. I'm seeing a few questions appearing in the chat function already, so I've got two questions from Councillor Rebick and then Councillor Simpson and then Councillor Barrett. So Councillor Rebick first, please.
Thanks very much, Convener. I will be as brief as possible. Am I okay asking both questions now, or do you want me to ask one and another one at the end? I don't mind.
It's maybe best doing one and then one.
I'm happy with that. If you are just aware, I don't want to hog any time particularly, but it was a long but appreciated update. So thank you. Thanks very much to everybody who spoke there. That was a very detailed update, and it's much appreciated. My first question is around, I know the Scottish Government made another £45 million available recently to support pupils through the pandemic. I'm not sure what our share will be. It struck me that it was more flexible this time. So the first part of my question is around, is it more flexible? I'm also aware, and it's well documented, I think we all understand that people from more deprived backgrounds and young people with additional support needs have been even more affected than everyone else by this pandemic. So I'm wondering, is the money flexible, and is there any plans to direct it in the direction of additional support needs?
Thank you very much, Councillor Rebick. In relation to the money, the additional money, there was, you're right, Deputy First Minister made an announcement that there would be a further £45 million coming to support education in the broadest sense and education recovery. The indications that we have had today is this money can be spent on a range of resources and supports that we will be able to identify as being those that we have the greatest need for. So some of that can be for staff and that would not just be for teaching staff, but for staff who work to support children and young people. Some of that could be for hardware and devices to help with access to any online digital working, and some of that could be around family support. And within each of those broad categories, my understanding is that there will be a degree of latitude as to how that monies are spent. You raised the point around the impact that the pandemic generally and lockdown, and therefore time out of school for extended periods, has had on children and young people. There was a paper published just last week which indicated that across not just Scotland but actually across the UK and other countries as well, where we're seeing the greatest impact negatively of the pandemic, it is indeed on those who are disadvantaged. And we know that also young people with some additional support needs will also be disadvantaged, and we are actively considering how it is that we can support more of those young people and their families, and whether this additional funding can in fact be used to support that as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that reassuring answer, Sheila, much appreciated.
Did you have a second question as well, Councillor Rubbick? Or
yes, yes, thanks very much. If I'm okay asking it now, I will do, and I'll be very brief. And I asked this question. This is not a loaded question, because I know we have a really difficult balance to strike between keeping as few pupils in school as possible, in order that we keep teachers and other staff safe, and that we stop or reduce community transmission as much as possible. And I absolutely understand that. Nonetheless, I welcome the fact that we've added essential shop workers to our list of key workers, not least because many of my constituents do that. And I also believe in many ways that essential shop workers have been the unsung heroes of this pandemic. What I would quite like to understand is, and I know it's a difficult question, and as I say, it's not loaded. I'm trying to understand, when we say essential shop workers, do we mean people that work in Tesco's and Asda's, or other supermarkets that are available, not least the 3 wonderful co-ops that I have in Perth City North? And do we mean people that work in chippies or Chinese carryouts or whatever? I'm just trying to understand that a little bit further, if I may.
What I would say, Councillor Rubbick, is that the criteria that we use is to help allocate as few places as possible, and as well as there being specific categories linked to different areas, professional and otherwise, there's other factors that come into play. So we would seek that both parents, for example, were key workers, before we would simply say, yes, if you work in X shop or Y shop, you would automatically have entitlement. It doesn't work like that. And critical in all of this is the work that employers do themselves. So first of all, that we've heard this from national messages as well, that it's important that employers look at all ways of supporting their employees. So whether that's about being flexible with shift patterns, day working, evening working, that kind of thing, to work around commitments that people undoubtedly have. And we need to factor that into the process as well. So if anybody thinks that they might be eligible, what we would ask is that they make an application, and that will be considered on all of its merits, and a place either awarded or not. And if it's not, then there'll be a full explanation as to why not. So
That's
I hope
great.
that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that's a good answer again, Sheena. Thanks very much for that. And I do genuinely understand the delicate nature of the balance here. And I also appreciate the fact that extended families are available for child care now as well, which they weren't in the first pandemic. But thanks for that answer.
thank you. Councillor Simpson, your questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Convener. Whilst I would like to express both my thanks and admiration, and I suppose that of my colleagues as well, to Mrs. Devlin and her team for the work they're doing and for the tremendous review we've just had. I do have a concern concerning the children of key workers, and perhaps I could get some reassurance. This is in the idea that they should not be disadvantaged and not have what I would describe as time management problems. The scenario is this, that if the children of frontline workers have a day at school, it's essentially a day of childcare. They're coming home then to parents, frontline workers perhaps, who have been working shifts, who may actually be away working a shift or just back from maybe a long shift. They may be having family care, as Councillor Rebick suggested there. And in the case of one wee boy I was speaking to recently, his granny looks after him, but she can't even work her phone. So she's no help to him in catching up with the online other work that has to be done out with the day they've spent having essentially childcare at school. And do we have any resources or any particular help we can give to these frontline workers who have this time management problem of fitting into a day after the child's been away all day at childcare, the work they need to do online at home?
Councillor Simpson, I hope that what I'm about to say is helpful and reassuring for you, and indeed for any of your constituents who may have approached you. We've taken a different approach this time round during this lockdown to that which we had undertaken when we were providing critical childcare at the children's activity centres. So we have opened all schools, although I should say that not necessarily every school will have children and young people attending, because there may not be any who are eligible to attend in particular schools. And remote learning is provided for all children and young people. And it's provided whether you are attending for that learning at school or whether you are undertaking your learning at home. So the learning that is provided for a class is the same and can be undertaken at home or at school. So the young people who are attending school are not just attending school for childcare, it's learning for everybody, and that's been in place since the 11th of January. And so there are a range of staff in school who would be able to provide supervision and support, but they may not necessarily be those young people's actual class teachers. Is that helpful to you? So what I'm saying is that there's an equity of offer. So it's not the case that young people who attend school then have their learning to do in the evenings. They are able to do that whilst they're at school.
No, thank you. I'm both reassured and better informed, and I can take any specific issue up separately, if I may.
Yes, of course.
I have a further question, convener, with your indulgence. It's along similar lines, seeking assurance. There must be out there some young people who sadly live in a household where the parents or carers may not be fully engaged in the process and may be unwilling or unable to assist. And whilst trying to get a level playing field for everyone, are there what measures are there in place to identify those young people who may be in a household where getting on with it is not as easy as in others? Is there any extra assistance we can offer them, or perhaps places away from home to help them with their schoolwork?
Councillor Simpson, again, I hope I might be able to provide some reassurance with you on this one. I think when Sharon provided her update, she gave a breakdown of the statistics in terms of percentages of numbers of young people who are attending. And whilst we recognise that, you know, any period of lockdown that involves remote learning will present a range of challenges for absolutely everybody, we recognise that for some people and some families that is more challenging. And so because we've taken a different approach and all of our schools are available to provide that remote learning, but from within the school premises, what we've been able to do is increase the number of children and young people who may be defined or considered to be vulnerable in some way, and there'll be a whole range of criteria as to what that is. And so we know that our colleagues in Hazel Robertson Services and Services for Children, Young People and Families have identified young people who would benefit from having their learning undertaken from a school, their own school, and likewise school staff have done the same. So we've got significantly more young people in our school for whom undertaking their learning at home might have been more of a challenge than it would have been for others. And of course what we have are schools keeping in very regular contact with young people and clocking very quickly if engagement levels are not what they would expect them to be, and following up on that immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheena. Councillor Simpson, does that answer your question? I'm sure if you've got any more specifics, officers will be happy to take them through the generic email.
No, I'm fully reassured, Convener. Thank you very much.
They have a habit of doing that to us. Thank you very much, Councillor Simpson. Councillor Barrett, please.
Thank you, Convener. I'd just like to say it was great that the Council's been able to complete the work on the nurseries and get the new facilities opened, and I know that was hugely appreciated in Oakbank. In terms of building work, I just wanted to ask, what's the impact of the COVID restrictions been on the building improvements that were planned and underway for Perth Academy? If that information is not available just now, maybe someone can send me it afterwards, but I don't know if it's easy to answer at the moment. Thank you.
Convener, I can answer that.
I think yeah, go to that one. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Barrett, we're on site at Perth Academy. We're attending the Parent Council towards the end of February. We're in discussions with the head teacher, just prioritising the work and how we work around the work, but the work's continuing and will continue over the next few months. But we will attend the Parent Council on the 24th of February just to provide a full update on exactly where we are and timelines.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett. Thank you, Greg. I think it's really encouraging the the business continuity, as it were, for particularly these projects. It's really important that we have managed to keep those going, so that when we can get children back into schools, that the facilities are there. And I think the work that Greg's team have done has been absolutely amazing to keep things going, because we know that's not been the case in other parts of the country, so it is particularly noteworthy. Councillor Forbes, followed by Councillor Reid, please.
Thanks, Convener. I wondered if we had set a minimum standard for each school for face-to-face learning with children. Obviously, face-to-face, I mean, as we are doing here over some kind of video link. Is there a minimum standard that we have each school has to agree to?
Councillor Forbes, I can start, and if you require more information, I'm sure Sian can come in. I would go back to our first period of lockdown and reference, following on from that, a substantial survey was undertaken of parents and carers to fully understand what their experience was like, and what, if we were to have entered another period of lockdown, as we have done, what they would like to see more of or less of. And you'll appreciate that there was wide-ranging views, but one of the things that did come through was parents were looking for flexibility, not least for some of the reasons that Councillor Simpson alluded to in his question to me. So they want flexibility to be able to engage with their children at different times, and recognising also that in households there may be several children undertaking their learning remotely, and also parents working, and therefore the ability to juggle all of that is something that's very personal to each family. So what we have done is produced guidance that sets out a minimum expectation in terms of the various components of remote learning, of which live interactions and live learning and teaching will be some, and that is different depending on different ages and stages. So that there has been some definition in relation to what that should constitute, depending on, for example, if you're in the senior phase and undertaking national qualifications, as opposed to if you're in primary 1, 2, 3 and we recognise that sitting for a long time at a computer is something that came through very clearly, that many parents and children and young people said that they didn't want to necessarily do, but they did want to have that as part of the offer. And so what I can say is that it is a part of the offer from every school, and schools will be knowing what works best in their local circumstances, and they have some latitude around the basic requirements that we have shared with them through our guidance.
Thanks, Sheena. So can I interpret from that then that if a parent has a child and the parent and the child both agree that the child would benefit from and would want some kind of face-to-face contact every day, then that would be available to them for even for a very short period of time?
I don't think we can say that a parent or carer and child can say that that would what would suit them. I think what we need to do is look at what is able to be offered, reflect the views which were varying from the survey that we had before, and try and offer a range of opportunities which will include the opportunity for some live interaction and live learning. But I don't think we can say that if one person asks for it, then a school can necessarily guarantee that that will be provided for that class.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Cheers.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, convener. I'm absolutely exhausted just listening to all the work that's been getting done, and I just want to check that all the staff who are working incredibly hard are getting as much support and help that they as individuals need, because it must be very emotionally draining on them. And more specifically, is there anything that we as councillors can do to assist? Sheena?
Thank you very much for raising that point, Councillor Reid. It's a vitally important one. We recognise that we're just weeks away from actually all of us living and working for a period of a year in a range of different restrictions at different times of the year. And of course, just now in the winter, it's probably posing greater challenge to many people because of the restriction in terms of daylight hours and all the rest of it. From early into first lockdown, there have been a number of wellbeing surveys that have been undertaken with our staff to understand from them how they're, first of all, how they're feeling, what they think could be done to help, whether that's in a pastoral sense, a practical sense, a professional sense. And there have been, I think, something in 9, 10, perhaps more than that, staff bulletins. So, for example, one of the most recent ones was about, coping with winter and winter working from home, and we've been doing that. So that's been happening across the council. Within the teams in Education and Children's Services, then different managers have been providing different kinds of support. And some of that has been about allowing much more flexibility in when people choose to do their work. So they're doing it at times that suit their home life working patterns, perhaps better than if you like a 9-to-5 routine. And we have been putting in a number of supports around some of our team leaders, our service managers, and our head teachers and senior leaders in our schools as well. So there has been a range of supports put in place. We've also been able to access some national supports for a number of our staff, and those have been welcomed. But what we do recognise is that there are some things that we just can't do for people, because we know that really people are missing that actual in-person contact with other people on a regular basis, and that's something that we are not able to provide, but we are trying to do the very next thing. So we have lots of informal sessions where people can just come together virtually. I know a number of colleagues still meet at a regular time every week, but over Teams, and share lunch and coffee together. So there are a range of formal and informal supports, and thank you for that offer. We'll have a think about if there is anything else that can be done, and we'd come back to you on that. Thank you.
I'm pleased to hear that there are some informal chats going on, and most importantly, very often the person at the very top gets minimal support. I hope you're looking after yourself.
That's very kind of you to say. I'm part of a team. Councillor Crawford, Councillor Reid and our team have worked very closely together, providing support to each other, and I'm very grateful for that, and I would like to think that they too have benefited from us working together. In fact, I know that they have. So it's not about an individual, it's very much about the team effort here, but thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Purvis, please.
Thank you, convener. I have two questions, if I may. The first one was almost entirely covered by the question that Councillor Rebeck put at the start, but just follows on from the discussion around staffing. I know that Sharon Johnson raised that in her contribution to the committee earlier. It was just some of the concerns that have been raised with me separately are about the fact that staff are obviously having to almost take on two roles, delivering the online learning, and then if they're also working in the learning centres as well. I'm just wondering, firstly, if you could clarify how that's working at the moment, and secondly, again, just some reassurance that if additional staffing requirement is needed, both at the moment and in future, if people are self-isolating, things like that, when we go back to in-person teaching, that additional funding would be considered to be used for staffing. So that's the first question.
Apologies for the slight delay in me answering questions, but there seems to be a time lag between me pressing to unmute myself and that function actually happening, so I do apologise for that. I think, convener, if I may, I'll ask Sharon to come in relation to that, but what I would say, Councillor Purvis, as I'm doing that, is that in the guidance that we have provided and in the establishment of how we support children and young people with their learning at home and in school, there is a principle around the fact that if you are providing remote learning for all of your classes, you are not simultaneously providing direct support for remote learning in one of our schools. But we do recognise that particularly in our amongst our senior phase colleagues and across the board, that there are concerns around how they're going to manage the assessment that will be required for the accreditation of learning in relation to national qualifications. So I'll ask Sharon if she wants to come in and add anything else to that, convener, if that's okay.
Thank you, Executive Director. Councillor Purvis, we have absolutely made that assertion that if you are providing in-school learning, then you don't then have to require to look after your class, and that's across all stages. We did have additional funding for staffing as part of COVID prior to the most recent announcement, and we have engaged an additional 32 FTE across the local authority. And that funding was mainly to provide support for lost learning and to cover absences where there has been positive cases of COVID, or for those who have been self-isolating. And in the main, in Perth and Kinross, we have been fairly fortunate in the fact that we've probably had over the piece since we've returned to school about 67 staff members who have been tested as positive. And the impact of that, though, has been that around 200 members of staff, and that's not just teaching staff, that's support staff and others as well, have had to self-isolate for a period of either 10 or 14 days, depending on the regulations. And so that staffing has been used to cover those absences. We did have initially some initial requests for teaching staff to cover COVID-related activities, which were actually sorted out through appropriate risk assessments. And so therefore, we now have a good staffing group that meets weekly and sometimes twice weekly. And any school that requires additional support puts in an application to that group, and that group are dealing with it. We receive weekly updates, and so therefore we manage that very, very quickly. There have been some issues in relation to accessing particular supply staff in some secondary subjects. There is a shortage of secondary supply teachers, and we're conscious of that, and so we've been also recruiting pretty much on a regular basis all the way through, and we recruited further staff last week, in fact, to make sure that we keep that going. But as the Executive Director says, the ongoing challenge for staff is going to be the administration of SQA, and so part of our thinking about the most recent funding is that we talk to our head teachers about how we can support that going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that response.
Councillor Purvis, you're on mute.
I did press it. Oh well, right, we'll try that again. A slightly more parochial question. I thought people were shaking their heads at the content of the question rather than the fact I was on mute, but glad that I've clarified that. So a slightly more parochial question, if I may, following on from Mr. Boland's comments about the school estate review. So in my case, obviously Cleash, but this is applicable to all the schools that are still in the review. I know that in the case of Cleash Primary School, there has now been a meeting with the Parent Council, and clearly everyone appreciates that given all of the other demands that are on the service, that this has led to some delays in being able to undertake that work. I'm just wondering, Mr. Boland mentioned about the online consultations that might be undertaken, and presumably with the wider public, not just the Parent Council. Do we have any indicative timescales for when that might happen in relation to the schools that we're still looking at? Thank you.
I think Greg will be able to answer that question, convener. Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Purvis, in relation to Cleash Primary School, you're right. Carol Taylor and a member of our team attended the recent Parent Council. I suppose in regard to Cleash Primary School, trying to identify what is the best solution for the investment in the school is providing the challenge, and obviously working with our property colleagues on what that looks like. So we can't give timescales. We've given a commitment to keep engagement with the head teacher and the Parent Council, and obviously local members. So we'll continue to do that. But until we have a final option, it's kind of hard to agree timelines. But we will obviously keep yourself and the local community up to date as we move forward.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Greg. I've not got any further questions in the chat box. I notice Councillor Barrett wants to make a comment, and then Councillor Rebick.
Thank you, convener. I just want to say briefly before we break that I'm really impressed by the commitment and dedication shown by the council and the school staff in the face of the restrictions, the constant changes, the challenges and the uncertainties they've had to deal with, as Mrs. Devlin said, for nearly a year now. I know many are also dealing with their own families and caring responsibilities and the weather impacts, looking outside today. And I also welcome the wellbeing support arrangements being provided to staff. I know from parent-teacher council meetings in schools in Perth City South over the last few months that the caring and practical approach and the opportunity given to parents and carers to give feedback through the surveys has also been very much appreciated. And I just wanted to thank everyone for everything that they're doing to care for and support our children and young people. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor Barrett, very well put. Councillor Rebick.
Thank you very much, convener. I'll be brief. I know everybody's needing a cup of tea or other things, shall we say, so I will be brief. But I just want to genuinely add my thanks to all the teaching staff, everybody else, whether they're in school or whether they're not in school, whether they're involved in teaching remote learning. And this is not a glib, a politician's thanks as well. I mean it sincerely, as I know everybody else does as well. But I know teachers, I know nursery nurses, I know early years practitioners, I know staff at Fairview, and I understand absolutely that this is really difficult. I think we're better placed this time. Scottish Government and local authorities have worked well together to provide resources, whether it's devices, data packages or funds for staff. I know that extended family are now able to help, which is a bonus. And I know teachers have had a bit of time to prepare this time and they had none the first lockdown, so that's a bonus. Nonetheless, it's still really difficult and I understand that. 2 points to note briefly. It's really difficult for everybody, but it's nobody's fault. It's not Boris Johnson's fault, it's not Nicola Sturgeon's fault, it's not John Swinney's fault. It is the fault of a global pandemic, and I think we all need to remember that. The second point I would just like to make, and I'll finish on, is that everybody is doing their best. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Teachers are doing their best, parents are doing the best, and young people, at least with a little bit nudge anyway, are also doing their best. So I think we all need to remember that. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Ribbick. Mrs Macaulay's just put a comment in the chat box which pretty much summed up what I was going to say, which was that, you know, Sheena, Sharon, Greg, Jackie, Hazel and all of their teams have really steered this ship through pretty rocky waters over the last, by my calculation, 303 days. Not that I'm keeping a note of it at all. Who would have ever thought that we'd be in this position? But I think, you know, there's that comment is about opportunities and challenges. And I think the challenges that we've seen and gone through, I think there has been a kind of refining of practice, an appreciation of things that maybe we didn't appreciate so much before, the hidden heroes in the IT department across the council, the folk who maybe were classed as bean counters but actually have been a crucial part of getting the resources out to families at you know, real crisis points for them. And I think when we look back on this time, I hope that we'll remember the things that we have appreciated and the people who kept the show on the road. And when we're in our darker days of trying to teach French to our S1 child that we just can't remember that French, that we'll remember and value those teachers that do that and do it so proficiently and patiently. So Sheena and Audrey and Carolyn, we would ask that you do take all our comments back to our staff, that we greatly appreciate them. And with that, we'll draw this part of the meeting to a close and have that well-earned comfort break. Aim to be back here, if we make it back here for 11:15, does that give everyone time to put the kettle on quickly or whatever? And we'll see you at 11:15. Thank you. Okay, that's just after 11:15. So Audrey's saying everyone's back. Yep, all members appear to be present. So we'll carry on. Thank you very much. I think that was it was quite a long session in the first part of the meeting, but an awful lot of detail to be absorbed. And I'm sure if anyone has got any specific issues in relation to anything, you know, in the area of business under ECS, then please do get in touch with officers via the generic one. But I think it's just been conscious of the workload that the officers are ploughing through at the moment. So that would be appreciated, I'm sure. So that brings us on to paper 6, which is the paper on self-directed support strategy for children, young people and families 2021 to 24. Who knows what can happen in that period of time? And I'll invite Sheena Devlin to introduce the report, please.
Thank you, Convener. This report seeks approval of the self-directed support strategy 21 to 24 for services, children, young people and families. It reflects key aspects of the legislation and considers the responsibilities for local authorities outlined in the National Implementation Plan. The report introduces the newly developed strategy, which outlines plans to work with children, young people and their families to increase choice and control when receiving their social care support. Hazel Robertson, Jackie Pepper, both happy to take and answer any questions that anybody might have in relation to this report, Convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director. There's it's quite a lengthy and quite a meaty report and quite a lot of detail in it. So I dare say there might be some questions. I'm not seeing any popping up in the chat box yet, but Hazel's ready and waiting to answer. Councillor Purvis.
Said I was still unmuting there, so I didn't want to make the same mistake again. Can you hear me? Yes? Great.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that, Convener. I think just first to say I think this is a really welcome report. With my other hat on as a member of the IGB, looking at this in relation to supporting adults, I think it's great that we offer more choice for people. But my question surrounds the fact that most people seem not to be exercising option 2, which is a similar problem that we have had in the IGB, because while it might be very scary for some people, and that's totally understandable, that they don't want to go the whole way and take full control of their money, so then they choose option 3, which means the council is still making the choice for them, which, while that's still a choice, is clearly not what the policy is designed for. So I think it's really good that you're talking about more education of people to give them all the information that they need, because I would think that we should be making clear that option 2 provides that benefit of having the choice, but taking away some of that bureaucracy and the burden. So my question, sorry, that was quite a long preamble, is around the timetable in the report. So you've got timescales for all of the different things, but the bit about education and informing people doesn't actually have timescales. And as far as I'm concerned, that's probably the most important part of this. So I'm just wondering if you could perhaps clarify, and appreciating again all of the concerns around COVID and on resources, but if you could maybe give some more detail on that. Sorry, thank you for indulging me, Convener.
Not at all. Thanks, Councillor Purvis. Certainly the timescales are a bit of an issue because they have slipped clearly with our COVID restrictions, and you'll note from the report that In Control Scotland, which is a national organisation, had done a piece of research which the papers and the appendices outline, with a number of service users. In fact, they were quite impressed. I know there was a total of 11 people did respond, but there's about 40 people receiving a direct payment, for example, and In Control Scotland were very pleased with the level of response that they received from the parents they contacted. You know, you will see from those responses that there are issues about transparency and about how easy it has been for parents and carers to access self-directed support. Similarly, the survey of staff has indicated, you know, that despite creative conversations taking place with children and their families in order to try and generate much more innovative solutions to whatever the positions they happen to find themselves in. You know, that has been complex, and your reference to option 2, where, you know, the person might choose to have the budget allocated to them to seek the supports they need, is less well used. But part of that is because there isn't the wealth of resources within the community for people to seek. So that is something that we need to build on, and the strategy has begun to outline. I mean, it's been part of the implementation plan, the national implementation plan, to look at the leadership and systems being in place, and how do we promote you know, direction for self-directed support. So all of that, the training element of that is definitely part of that workforce planning. That is something that is undoubtedly needed, and we really need strategy in place to begin to help not just ourselves, but all of our partners begin to work with us to look at how can communities be engaged with the local authority and with families to best meet the needs of individual children as they are identified. So I think, you know, that's a definite action that we need to revisit in terms of the timetable for those actions, and having a clear indication of the timescales that that's going to take.
Okay, thank you. And Convener, if I may, just a supplementary on the aspects of not having the availability in the community. And again, this is something, as you'll know, we've faced in the adult care sector as well. And there's, you know, a great example which I always give, and I've met with them before, of the Care and Wellbeing Cooperative in Highland. Again, I think their focus is on adults rather than children and young people, but that principle of having that support within your community, people who can you know, shape that care around the needs of the individual, which is clearly what we're all trying to achieve. One of the challenges I put back at the IGB is about what we can do to encourage those type of organisations in the community, because often they need a little bit of funding to get started. They maybe need some help with some of the bureaucracy, and clearly there's been changes at the adult level with the Care Inspectorate about how these are regulated, because it can't be the same way as we would do for you know, care homes, that type of thing. And you know, apologies, my knowledge on this is more around the adult sector. But is there a similar thing we can do to try and foster more of those type of services for children and young people, which would allow people to use option 1, option 2?
Yep, I mean, I think certainly the implementation of self-directed support does complement our commitment to the Perth and Kinross offer, and about how do we engage communities better in delivering the services for the communities that we live in. I think self-directed support also offers an opportunity to use the funds that we have in a much more flexible way, so that instead of them being invested in one particular service, they can be used much more flexibly. So I think we're still at an early stage. In Perth and Kinross, we are amongst the first to have a strategy at all. There is one other authority in Scotland who has a strategy for children and families. So we are at the forefront of looking at, you know, how do we begin this process and begin to expand opportunities for other services to develop, for families to have much greater choice and control over the services that they receive.
You'll note, Councillor Purvis, in the conclusions of the report, it refers to the paper being a blueprint to help promote a change in culture, and I think that's very much, you know, what you were referring to there. It's the start of that journey for change within the education and children's services aspect of the business. Thank you for that, Hazel and Councillor Purvis. Councillor Pover.
Thank you very much, Convener. I'd just like to say, first of all, that I'm actually very supportive of the self-directed report. I'm really keen to see that happening and be rolled out. I'd just like to refer to page 65 of the report that says, 34 young people have benefited from the purchase of key items of furniture and white goods which have enhanced their lives. And I just wonder how closely that the purchase, how the quality and value is monitored when it comes to purchasing these goods. Just obviously, you know, I'm just kind of conscious that that system could be misused, and I'd just like some reassurance on that. Hazel, I think you're muted.
Sorry, apologies. That's just not come off. Yeah, sorry. I was just saying that the outcomes that are noted there have been prepared for some time, and you know that was at an early stage. We have awaited the development of the national standards, which are now been included in the strategy, and we felt that was important to wait for those to be confirmed. But you know, those outcomes were some of the early outcomes of us implementing self-directed support in much wider services than simply children who have a disability, which has been where we started from and where it's grown from. But in order to begin to I suppose have a wider understanding of how self-directed support can be used in a much wider sense to be preventative and avoid costly services at a much later stage. We've encouraged staff to consider things much more flexibly. So these are situations where children would have required an input from services, particularly the social work service, but you know, it could be from a range of other third sector services too. And some of these outcomes here have prevented that being required because of the provision of key, I suppose, purchase of household items, for example, that have prevented children perhaps needing alternative care, or families being much more able to manage their resources. So I'm not sure if that answers your question or not.
Yeah, I think Hazel, you've answered it somewhat. It's just I'm kind of aware that back in the day, when the Independent Living Fund was introduced, there was a lot of issues about misuse of that fund, and I suppose I'm just curious as to know how things have moved on in that time. I think that's the crux of it. But you have answered it, and I will be keen to see how things develop with the self-directed funding. Thank you.
I mean, just to offer another reassurance, I mean, the actual allocation of the funding is closely monitored. I mean, it's not that, you know, a sum of money is handed over to a family. You know, that these are things, and particularly where the service user becomes an employer. So, for example, when a family become the employer of a personal assistant, for example, you know, that's all monitored through employment law as well. So, you know, that's very closely monitored by our finance colleagues.
Thanks very much. I won't hold you back, but I think that was the issue. It was who families were employing as their assistant in the past, and that was open to a lot of financial abuse, to be frank. So I'm just looking to see how that will go. But I won't hold you up any longer. Thanks very much, Hazel.
Jackie Pepper wanted to come in with a supplementary comment, and then Councillor Forbes.
Thank you very much, Convener. I think really also just to give you some additional reassurance, Councillor Pover, is that I suppose for children and the development of this strategy across you know, a wide range of need as that might arise for individual children and families, I suppose we need to have reassurance that each of those children and those families will have the support of a child's plan or a child protection plan. So the ongoing support and monitoring and review of that will be within those arrangements. So I hope that gives you further reassurance, because it's slightly different within the children and families sector than it would be with adults. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Jackie. I appreciate it.
Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I have two very quick questions. Do you want them together, or do you want me to come back around again later on with the second one? And you're still on mute, Convener. I didn't hear you, Caroline. You're still on.
Just take them both before my mute button.
Right, thank you. Thanks, Hazel. Thanks for this really long and very complex, but quite easy to read report. So thanks for that. Unfortunately, my C mishap has crashed, so I'm working from the notes I made when I read the papers earlier in the week. So please bear with me. But if I can just go to my first question, which I think follows on from what Councillor Pover was asking. It's on page 37, and if I remember rightly, it was almost half, or about 40% of carers do their own thing effectively, and I think you said most of them use that to employ a personal assistant. And I wondered therefore if the economies of scale may come into play, and would it be better therefore if the council were just to take that on, and rather than each individual family employing their own personal assistant, could the council commission a company to provide them all, and would that end up being cheaper? And if that question doesn't make sense, it's because I can't read the document today, sorry.
No, that's perfectly okay. I mean, the whole value of SDS is that, you know, individual families can appoint a personal assistant to work in a way that is suited to them. You know, so the hours that they work, the type of resource that they provide. I mean, I think it would be much more complex to do that on a wider scale. And I mean, certainly nationally, that's been seen as the way forward, that people have much more control over how their services are delivered, and what they can ask a personal assistant to do. Option one is by far, option one being a direct payment for people to recruit a personal assistant, is by far the most popular at the moment. But some of that is related to the earlier point, I think, with the Councillor Purvis raised about, you know, how do not just staff but also families, how are they made aware of what the options might be? Because I think we are all limited by what we know exists, and you know, the whole purpose of SDS is that it should not be service led, that it's about the individual and their personal outcomes and what they seek to achieve, and that, you know, that's much better provided for when that is a dedicated resource for that individual family. But, you know, I mean, I think these things are under constant review, not just locally but nationally, and you know, that's something that will evolve with time, I think, in terms of the whole implementation of SDS.
Okay, thanks, Hazel. That's reassuring. And my second question, again, working from my notes, was Appendix 6, and it was the questionnaire responses. And I noticed that most of them only had 11 responses. So I suppose the only question I can ask is, was that the whole of Scotland, or was that just Perth and Kinross?
No. That's just Perth and Kinross. And there were 40 families contacted and 11 people responded, which, as I say, in control felt proportionately that was a very positive response to a questionnaire.
Okay, yeah, I agree, actually. Yeah, I missed that bit in the report. Apologies. I didn't see the bit about 40, and I thought 11 looked terrible, but 11 in the scale of 40 doesn't look nearly as terrible. So apologies for missing that. Thank you very much, Hazel, and thank you, convener.
Thank you both. I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat box. So I'll move on to moving the report. This report seeks approval of the self-directed support strategy, and it is, as you've heard, a very positive step forward in our plans to work with children, young people and their families, and in supporting them to increase choice and control when receiving their social work support. As always, behind this paper is a huge amount of hard work by a dedicated team of officers, and Jackie Pepper, Hazel Robertson and their team have ensured that this paper brings together the legislative framework that's in place through the 2013 Act to reinforce the commitment that we all share, that people, regardless of their age, are involved in all decisions about their care. As a council, there's a duty on us to deliver transparency in the planning of packages of support and to make it as easy as possible for individuals and families to access the support that they need. Those of us who sit on the corporate parenting group know that the recommendations from the independent care review and the promise really brought into stark focus the need for us to ensure the principles of dignity, participation, meaningful involvement and the supporting people to make informed choices about the care and support they receive are at the very core of our objectives. And as we move forward, you will see these threads through this paper. As mentioned earlier, at 4.1 in the conclusion to this paper, it refers to this being a blueprint to help promote a change in culture. I think as we've heard this morning, we're well on our way on that journey. This is a very welcome paper, and I hope it is one that members will be able to give wholehearted support to. Can I ask Councillor Duff if he'll second the paper?
Thank you, convener. Yes, the self-directed support strategy will help this council to develop a more informed, more flexible, more inclusive and more responsive care and support services for our children, young people and their families, and that is to be welcomed. It is also good to hear that Perth and Kinross Council is once more at the forefront of introducing a new strategy. Families want more choice and more control over their social care services, so it's important that families are involved in and can choose the type of support that they receive in order to ensure best personal outcomes for their children. The strategy recognises the need for both our officers and families to better understand how self-directed support works and for more creative ways to be developed so that these funds can help children and young people to maximise their potential. I very much welcome this strategy, which complements our Perth and Kinross offer and which will, I am sure, benefit children, young people and families in need and help to bring about improvements to their lives. Can I thank authors Hazel Robertson and Sharon Cooper for pulling this comprehensive report together and presenting it this morning. Convener, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Can I ask if there's any comments on the report? I'm not seeing any at the moment, but I'll give you a minute. Councillor Rebick.
Thanks again, Convener. Get the camera on. Thanks again, Convener. I'd just like very briefly, I just want to say thanks to Councillor Pover for her input in regards to this paper, and once again thanks to the officers involved. Our group's very supportive of this. It's definitely to be commended, so thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rebick. If there's no further comments, can I ask that we agree the report?
Agreed.
Okay, thank you very much. That takes us on to the next paper, which is paper 7, the Education Highland Perthshire Learning Partnership Update Report. These have got really snappy titles, Sheena. So I'm going to ask Sheena Devlin to introduce the report, please.
Yeah, I'll just call it the HPLP report.
Yeah, that's even snappier.
The purpose of this report is to provide Lifelong Learning Committee with a progress update on the work of the HPLP and to provide detail of the progress and actions of both the learning and the property subgroups. The HPLP is being developed and implemented on the following key principles and commitments. Firstly, improved collaboration and partnership between Pitlochry High School and Breadalbin Academy. Secondly, a Perth College UHI Highland Perthshire Learning Hub located in Pitlochry High School. Digital learning and also wider community partnership. The learning and property subgroups have worked proactively and positively to explore and begin to deliver a new model for senior phase education and a new learning partnership in Highland Perthshire. And they've consulted and engaged with staff, with young people and with parents. The senior leadership teams and representatives of the parent councils of both schools have provided strong leadership in progressing the action plans, and both school communities are supporting a more collaborative approach to learning across Highland Perthshire. What you will see from the report is some progress has of course been impeded by the impact of the pandemic, but significant progress has been made in a number of areas. We have a range of officers here who are able to assist with any questions, and we have Sharon Johnson, Donald MacLeod and David McCluskey, as well as myself, who can answer from a learning perspective, and of course Greg Boland and Carol Taylor will be able to answer questions in relation to the property side of things. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Sheena. Can I ask if there's any questions? Not seeing any coming. I'll give it a minute. Councillor McDade.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me, Convener? Yeah. Sorry, it was taking a second there to come on. Yeah, thank you very much for that, and thanks for the update, Executive Director. wanted to probe. I mean, the report. There's a lot of real positives there, and a real credit to all the staff involved who've achieved, an incredible amount during COVID, despite COVID, and perhaps some of it has been made easier because of COVID and some of the technologies that we're now using across the council. But what I wanted to probe was actually the work of the property subgroup, which has been, by my reading of the report, quite significantly impeded by COVID, as a lot of construction work has been. Although I've heard, obviously, earlier in the meeting that other education property matters have been able to progress more recently. So I'm wondering if perhaps in the last period that there has been maybe more progress made. So a couple of questions. Can we get a bit more information about how often that property subgroup is meeting, has been meeting, and is likely to meet in the future, so that we can get some more progress on that, hopefully this year, once we perhaps more of the vaccination rollout. And also I was slightly confused around the report, because it talked about a different space now being looked at for the learning hub, for the UHI learning hub. So just wondering if we can get a bit more information on that as well.
I'll ask Carol Taylor, Councillor McDade, to respond to your questions, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. As you rightly say, we have been quite hampered in relation to COVID, especially on the HPLP project. The property subgroup met 2 weeks ago. We hadn't met regularly since March, basically, because the project was, to all intents and purposes, on hold. Rachel Sims, the project officer, did keep in touch with the team through email, trying to update them and saying to them that things weren't happening and there weren't resources allocated to the project. We've always run the project subgroup, or the property subgroup, in a way where we actually have a milestone, and we will meet them in relation to milestones. So at the moment, the next milestone will be delivery of some of the feasibility work on the project. We have focused on the social spaces, the parking, and the dining, to try and prioritise that in relation to not having all of the work done at the same time. So when we have that feasibility back, we will have a meeting with the property subgroup, but we will keep in touch with them through email. Your second question related to the space of the college. Yes, we had identified a temporary space for the college for August 2020, because obviously we wouldn't have been able to do significant works between, I think it was January, February last year and August. So we'd identified a temporary space, but actually both the school and the college agreed that a different space would make better sense in the long term. So it's just a difference between temporary and long term.
Thank you for that. Councillor McDade, does that answer your questions?
Yes, no, answers those questions. I've got a supplementary based on...
I've just noted, it's just popped up in my chat function, yep.
Thanks, yeah, there's a wee bit of a delay, I think. Thank you very much, Carol. That really, that explains a lot, and particularly the temporary space to the more permanent space. That makes sense and is very positive. Just to follow up on what you said there, in terms of obviously the delay that's been caused, and you said there hasn't been resource allocated. So obviously the council allocated £100,000 towards HPLP support, and I'm just wondering on that basis whether we're going to need more resourcing allocated going forward to fund the continued support of the project in the coming financial years.
I think Greg will probably take this one, Councillor McDade, but I have to say that I gave the wrong impression when I said that resource hadn't been allocated. We have actually started working on the project again, and generally these resources are funded through fees to the capital programme. I don't know if Greg wants to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to add to Councillor McDade. I think what Carol was saying there was actually staff and resource within the property team to work through the feasibility options of the specification of what's to be done, rather than there wasn't money to do it. I think that's what you meant to say, Carol. Was that what you were saying?
The £100,000 wasn't towards resourcing the property side of it.
Yeah, sorry, that's correct, Councillor McDade. Yes, the works that will be done to the school will be funded from the capital programme, 100,000 in relation to staffing and transport.
Thank you. Can I just, on a wider point, ask then if we're content that there is enough funding to essentially continue the work of the project going forward?
If I can come in, convener, and perhaps Sharon or David or Donald may also wish to add to that. You're absolutely right in terms of the monies that was made available through budget motion, if I recall correctly, to support this work, and we have used some of that. And in a part of the paper, it does say that there may be further costs incurred as we move through. I think, if I'm checking back my notes, we're probably at sections, in section 3, I think, where we talk about some of the sections 3.3 and 3.4, where we talk about that. What we're not in a position to say is that we will definitively not need any further funding, but at this stage we're not quite sure how much we do need. We would seek to be finding ways to support that if we can within the service, and if we can't, then we would raise those as pressures.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that was just really what I was trying to understand, was in relation to getting the best additional funding if it's required going forward. But that's very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. I think if everyone could be on mute, I'm getting a lot of feedback. That better? Yep. Thank you. I'm not seeing any further questions in the chat box, so I'll go on to move the report. In moving this report, I'd like to thank the officers for bringing this paper today. An awful lot has happened since we last considered the report mentioned in 1.2 of the paper almost a year ago to the day. I would especially like to thank the two head teachers, Mrs Laney and Mr Devine, for their efforts in delivering the activities outlined in the report, along with their deputies and staff. I'd also like to thank the pupils and parents for their involvement and our partners at Perth College UHI. There are many positive steps which have been taken on a journey which has undoubtedly been disrupted by the pandemic. We remain fully committed to supporting both schools in the future as we seek to develop the Highland Perthshire Learning Partnership, and in working with the community in Pitlochry to develop a plan for improvement of and increased community use of the Pitlochry High School building. Can I ask Councillor Duff if you'll second the report, please?
Thank you, Convener. I very much welcome this report, and I'm both delighted and excited by its contents. When I was elected to the Highland Ward in 2018, the future of Pitlochry High School and education in Highland Perthshire was the subject of much debate and speculation. I believe that this administration's proposal to develop the Highland Perthshire Learning Partnership was an innovative and forward-thinking approach which has already borne fruit and which I believe will go from strength to strength. The report details a number of achievements which have already been delivered: improved collaboration and partnership between the two schools, the creation of the partnership with Perth College UHI, which is leading to additional curricular choices for all Highland Perthshire pupils, better transition arrangements for those Pitlochry pupils making the move to Breadalbin Academy for S5, S6, enhanced digital learning, who knew back then what was to come to pass, and further improvements to the school building, to name but a few. I would also like to express my thanks to our officers, to the senior management team and teachers of both schools and Perth College UHI, to both parent councils and to the parents and pupils, all of whom have embraced this opportunity with great enthusiasm and energy. Like so many plans, coronavirus has interrupted the flow of progress, but I'm delighted with this support and the future plans for the Learning Partnership, and I'm very happy to second the recommendations. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. I've got comments in the chat box from Councillor McDade, Councillor Rebick, and then Councillor Forbes. So, Councillor McDade.
Thank you very much, convener. Yeah, I think it's a really positive report on the whole, particularly on the learning subgroup side. There's a lot of good development, as I said earlier, in terms of various aspects. The transition process, which was rated quite poorly by previous S5 and S6 students, it's really positive to see a lot of the work that's been done on that, even despite COVID having moved to a virtual transition, and that being supported by staff at Pitlochry as well as Brynalbyn. I think that's a really positive move. I think also the development of the new opportunities course with Perth College UHI is a really good opportunity for young people who don't maybe want to follow that traditional route through to S5 and S6, and open up opportunities for them in vocational or other further learning opportunities that maybe don't follow, as I say, that traditional route. And you know, as we've heard earlier, it's really positive that there is dedicated space being resourced within the building for that. I also think it's just really positive to see a lot of the digital learning work that's been done. I think there's really positive news around the Digital Schools Award, the progression that's been made, not just by Brynalbyn, but by all the schools in the Highland Learning Partnership area. I think that's a really positive move that all our schools are working closer together. And as I said earlier, I think COVID and the fact that it has forced us into using a virtual environment a lot more has perhaps enabled some of that movement that, you know, and again, we as elected members previously were perhaps reluctant to do a lot of things electronically. We have been forced to do so, and to be honest, I think a lot of it's going to stay. So, you know, these are some potentially positive sides out of COVID. You know, if we can take anything positive out of COVID, then, you know, there's maybe a few things. I also I think the really exciting thing, however, from my point of view, is the increasing subject choice options for pupils, and the fact that we've got National 5 Business Management is now going to be offered to pupils in Pitlochry, but also even more exciting, to be honest, is the increased higher and advanced higher options that are likely to come in the next couple of years through more virtual learning. And I think, as I've said, a lot of the experiences that we've had over the past year, as we've been forced to deliver some of this content electronically, will allow us to build a really strong basis for ensuring that pupils are getting the best sort of blended model where appropriate, and actually the teachers will have so much more experience to be able to put into that work going forward, and you've achieved an incredible amount. You know, I think we've mentioned earlier in this meeting already how much our staff, our teams, and you know, our ECS colleagues have really achieved in delivering education pretty much overnight electronically to people's homes, and supporting parents to do so, and supporting our young people to do so. Actually, all of that work is not going to be in vain. It's not just going to be for COVID. We can take a lot of that learning and use it in the future for a lot more of this sort of work. So I'm really positive about all of that. I am disappointed, obviously, at the delay in the property subgroup work. It is inevitable to a degree that COVID was going to delay some of that. I'm, you know, hopeful, based on what's been said in today's meeting, that work has been, you know, restarted, and I hope we will see some rapid progress on that front. Because you know, it really, the building was feeling a bit tired when I was there, and that was actually now over 10 years ago. So actually, it would be really positive to see more development on that front as quickly as possible, because these things take time. So I really would welcome some development on that. But on the whole, a very positive news story. Really great work between the two schools and their wider community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McDade. Councillor Rebick, and then Councillor Forbes.
Thanks again, convener. I think a lot of what I was going to say has already been covered, but it is important to note that we've come a long way over the last 2 or 3 years, more so on the learning side than on the property side. But as has previously been said, I completely understand it's COVID that's got in the way of the property side, and I look forward to seeing that moving forward when we're in some kind of post-COVID world. I look forward to that. Elected members have made a big fuss about education in Highland Perthshire, and I'm pleased that we have, in making that fuss in the nicest possible way, we have created work for officers, and I'm thanking officers again. It doesn't reduce any genuine intent in that, because I'm doing it again. It is appreciated. I think we were in a really difficult place 2 or 3 years ago, and it's down to officers and both parent councils and the both communities beyond that we've made improvements. We've made education in Highland Perthshire better, and I think anybody that's been involved in that deserves our thanks, so that's appreciated. There's a whole list of specific achievements which Councillor Duff and Councillor McDade have already listed. I won't go over it again, but on a very human level, if I've read the report correctly, there was 4 pupils have done a health and social care course at the Perth College hub that may not have had that opportunity before. So although it's only 4, it's a good start, and I think that is what we do these things for. It's so young learners can get as wide a possible opportunity, and I think that's one specific thing that I took out from the report. So we're getting there, and thank you very much to everybody involved. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Councillor Rebick. Councillor Forbes, followed by Councillor Baird.
Thanks, Convener. I'm going to use Councillor Rebick's phrase and say I will be brief, but actually will be brief. I just want to say, despite all of what's going on, despite all of what we talked about earlier on with the pressures of COVID and all that kind of stuff, I'm just delighted to see that the commitment to this is still there and the work is still being done on it. So thanks to all the officers for doing so.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Baird.
Thank you very much, Convener. I too will be very brief. It's good to end a session with a really good news story, and this is a really good news story for not just the schools in Highland Perthshire, but the whole community. They have been looking for better educational facilities for some time, and this is a real opportunity not only to educate but also to help the economy, because people can actually maybe be educated there and still get jobs in Highland Perthshire. So it's great what's achieved when everybody works together, when you listen to schools, listens to parents and listens to communities, and councillors can actually agree on a way forward. And thank you to all the officers who probably thought this was a task maybe too much for them. So in spite of COVID, they have managed to bring this forward. So thank you to one and all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baird. So with that, can we agree the recommendations in the report?
Agreed.
And that brings us to the end of the meeting, and our mute buttons didn't fail us completely today, so that's progress. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you to our Executive Director and all of her team. And I would just end it with reiterating to Carolyn Weston and Audrey Macaulay, if they could take back our comments to their staff and to all the other officers, to their teams, because we are well aware that over the last 303 days, how hard you've all been working, and we know that we're not out of the woods yet. So, but we're right there behind you, and anything we can do to support your efforts, please count us in. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and all stay safe and well. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Bye.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you, Convener.